Hey guys, in this video I'll be ranking the top 10 best or most iconic rivalries in bodybuilding in tier list format. The rivalries I'll be showcasing are ones that I felt were the most relevant and impactful, but if I left any out that you think deserve a mention, definitely let me know down below. Now, in my opinion, for something to count as a true rivalry, there has to be more than, just one competitive year. I'm talking about multiple encounters on the Olympia stage, a real back and forth type of narrative, and some level of personal or stylistic contrast that made the matchup exciting, whether that was friendly, hostile, or somewhere in between. For the tier list, S plus tier is for the best rivalries ever, which should be pretty self-explanatory. S tier includes the most iconic rivalries that were very competitive and memorable, but just a step below the best of all time. A tier features strong, meaningful matchups with some sort of drama, but not quite as impactful as the other tiers. B tier would cover decent rivalries that lacked depth or were a little bit one-sided, and finally C tier is for mid-tier rivalries that weren't the most impactful yet have a key characteristic from a higher tier. Now, before we do dive into the video, I want to give a quick shout out to my partner, Old School Labs. If you guys are interested in high quality supplements, you can use my code JakeUltimate or check out the link in the description down below. With that all being said, if you guys enjoy these videos, a like and sub would be awesome. And without any further ado, let's get into this video. Starting things off, we have one of the most legendary and foundational rivalries in bodybuilding history, Sergio Oliva versus Arnold Schwarzenegger. This was a clash of titans in every sense. Sergio, the defending Mr. Olympia, was known for his mind-blowing proportion, dense muscle, and tiny waist, while Arnold was the up-and-coming star with insane charisma and a hunger to take over the sport. Their first true face-off came in 1969 where Sergio beat Arnold head-to-head, becoming a three-time champ and handing him the only Olympia loss of his entire career. That alone makes it special, but Arnold came back better in 1970, bringing improved detail and presentation to finally dethrone the champ. That win marked the beginning of Arnold's era of dominance, but it didn't end the rivalry just yet. In 1971, Sergio was disqualified along with several other athletes due to politics and federation disputes, leaving Arnold to win uncontested. But then came 1972, arguably the most, controversial Olympia of that decade, and Sergio showed up with what many believe was his all-time best, better legs, tighter waist, and arguably a more complete physique overall than Arnold. Meanwhile, Arnold didn't bring his sharpest package ever, and in my opinion it was slightly worse than 1971, yet he still walked away with the win. Till this day, fans still debate whether it was due to politics, Arnold's popularity, or something else entirely, and even Arnold has hinted at not fully deserving that title. Of course, they would never go on to compete against each other ever again, but in just a few showdowns, their rivalry helped shape the golden era and left behind a legacy that's still being talked about over 50 years later. So, in my opinion, this rivalry would land in S tier, not the longest one ever, but without a doubt one of the most iconic, impactful, and debated in history. So yeah, definitely an S tier rivalry. Next up, we've got another notable rivalry including Arnold, and this time it's with Mike Mentzer, one of the most polarizing figures in bodybuilding history. Now, this rivalry is a bit different because it wasn't built on multiple years of head-to-head battles, which blatantly contradicts my own definition of a rivalry. That said, while their only Olympia showdown came in 1980, the sheer controversy surrounding it has kept the rivalry alive for decades, making it one of the most iconic ever. And how could I leave out one of the most controversial rivalries of all time? Now, Mike was coming in hot after a perfect score at the 1978 Mr. Universe and a very strong Olympia showing in 1979, where he actually placed second overall behind Frank Zane. Many believed he was within striking distance of that title in 1980, especially with Zane and other top names fading, but 1980 was the year that Arnold would come out of retirement, announcing his comeback last minute, and won the Olympia in what many felt was a politically driven decision. Mike placed a shocking 5th despite looking very solid and well-conditioned, while Arnold, though still impressive, was not quite at his former peak. Their backstage arguments, philosophical clashes over training methods, and the intensity of that single event created a memorable but very short-lived rivalry. It's one of the most talked about one-to-one and, one and done showdowns in bodybuilding, but ultimately they only competed against each other once, as I mentioned, and it was more about the drama than any real back and forth competition. So, in my opinion, this rivalry would land in C tier. It was iconic for the controversy, but kind of lacked everything else like length, depth, and real competitiveness to be ranked much higher. Moving into the 1980s, we come to Lee Haney versus Rich Gaspari, which, while not the most dramatic rivalry, was by far one of the most consistent of Haney's dominant reign. Now, of course, Haney was a very dominant force, winning 8 straight Mr. Olympia titles, and is widely considered one of the greatest champions ever. But despite how often he stood alone at the top, there was one man who kept knocking at the door, and that was Rich Gaspari. From 1986 to 1988, Gaspari finished second to Haney 3 years in a row, making him Haney's most persistent challenger by far. Rich was known for his unbelievable condition, especially for that era, with striated glutes, etched detail, and razor-sharp muscle separation that very few could match. He helped push the sport towards a new standard of leanness and muscular refinement, and completely forced all other competitors to match him. Now, in my opinion, what made this rivalry so compelling was the clear contrast in their two physiques. Haney had the superior structure, he had those broad shoulders, small waist, flowing lines, and brought size and aesthetics together in a way that looked effortless. Gaspari, on the other hand, didn't have the same natural shape or symmetry, but he made up for it with brutal training, unmatched discipline, and a level of shredded condition that made everyone else take notice. Their face-offs were always respectful, and there was no real animosity, but the competitive fire was definitely there, especially for Gaspari, who was hungry to knock off the champ. Still, despite his best efforts, Rich was never able to beat Haney, and there was never a real moment where the decision felt like it was up in the air. Haney was simply too complete, and he always managed to bring just enough size, balance, and presence to hold on to his crown. Their rivalry was never explosive or controversial, but it was definitely meaningful and helped to define that middle stretch of Haney's Olympia run. So, in my opinion, this rivalry would land in B tier. It was consistent, competitive in spirit, and very historically relevant, but never close enough to feel like the title was truly at stake. Next up is a rivalry that doesn't always get the spotlight it deserves, but when you look back at the details, it was clearly one of the most competitive of the 90s, and that would be Dorian Yates versus Shawn Ray. Dorian was known for steamrolling the competition with his dense, grainy muscle and overwhelming size, but Shawn Ray was one of the few guys who stood on the Olympia stage and actually gave him a true run for his money more than one time. Despite being significantly smaller in stature, Shawn made up for it with a near-flawless combination of symmetry, proportion, clean lines, and consistent condition, and he was a master at presenting his physique and never showed up out of shape. Their clashes spanned several Olympias, but the real highlights were 1994 and 1996, where the gap between them felt razor thin. In 1994, Dorian came in off, not just slightly, but pretty noticeably. His midsection looked bloated, his left bicep tear was very visible, and overall he lacked the sharpness that we saw in 93, or what we would see again in 95. Meanwhile, Shawn brought arguably his best look ever, a tight waist, flowing structure, balanced development, and the kind of polish that made you question whether size should really be the only deciding factor. Till this day, fans and historians alike argue that Shawn should have and could have won that Olympia, and some even say it's one of the biggest missed opportunities of his career. Now, in 1996, Dorian improved, but even then, Shawn brought another top-tier version of himself, and depending on what you value more in a physique, there's still a very solid argument that he could have taken that one as well. Now, in my opinion, what makes this rivalry so fascinating is how consistently competitive it was, even during an era that Dorian is remembered for dominating in. Shawn was never just a placeholder runner-up, he was a true threat, and his ability to stay relevant and dangerous year after year speaks volumes. Their contrasting physiques, the brutal mass and grain of Dorian versus the refined, very classic lines of Shawn, created a visual battle that was always engaging. So in my opinion, this rivalry firmly lands in S tier. It had multiple close calls, stylistic contrast, and a genuine tension around the outcomes of their placings. It wasn't just a matter of who showed up bigger, it was about who embodied the ideal physique of the time, and that made each of their encounters genuinely exciting and debatable. Moving into the late 90s, we arrive at one of the most shocking and memorable rivalries of the modern era, and that would be Flex Wheeler versus Ronnie Coleman. This one truly encapsulates the drama of a rising star, derailing what everyone thought was a guaranteed coronation. Going into the 1998 Mr. Olympia, most fans and experts expected Flex to finally take the Mr. Olympia title. Dorian Yates had retired, the throne was open, and Flex came in looking phenomenal, arguably his best look of all time. His balance, shape, and aesthetic flow were nearly unmatched, and it really felt as if this was his year to win. But out of nowhere, Ronnie Coleman, who had placed 9th the year before, made an absolutely mind-blowing leap forward. He came in not just better, but light years better, with insane condition, a freaky level of size, and an unbeatable backside. Flex was exposed in key areas like the hamstring and glute condition, and Ronnie's dominance was so overwhelming that it completely rewrote the pecking order of the sport. The rivalry didn't end there either, though. In 1999, Flex tried again, bringing another incredible package, but Ronnie had leveled up once again. The back-to-back losses were crushing for Flex, who had long been considered one of the most gifted bodybuilders ever, and while this rivalry was short-lived in terms of actual battles for the title, it was monumental in what it represented, a passing of the torch, a shocking shift in the sport, and the beginning of Ronnie's 8-year, reign. The contrast of their physiques also made the battles even more compelling. Flex represented beauty, flow, and classic lines, while Ronnie was pure freak factor, density, and dominance. The 1998 and 1999 Olympias remain two of the most dramatic and talked about showdowns in history, and for that reason, in my opinion, this rivalry would land firmly in S tier. It was a brief but very explosive one, changed the direction of bodybuilding, and featured two all-time greats clashing at their peaks. Now we move on to what I consider the greatest and most iconic rivalry in bodybuilding history, Ronnie Coleman versus Jay Cutler. This wasn't just about, one or two controversial placings. This was a full-blown saga that stretched out over nearly a decade, with multiple Olympia showdowns and a real sense of tension, respect, and legacy on the line. Jay first emerged as a true threat to Ronnie in 2001, where many believed he had done enough to win. He brought one of the most shredded and very aesthetic versions of his physique ever, but Ronnie came back a bit better in the finals, and the judges awarded him a controversial win, sparking years of back-and-forth debate and lighting the fire that would fuel their rivalry for many years to come. From 2001 to 2005, Jay kept fighting and losing, placing second 4 times, and each time bringing improvements, refusing to fall. Meanwhile, Ronnie continued to push past the boundaries of mass and condition, putting up some of the freakiest physiques the stage has ever seen. What made this rivalry so legendary, though, wasn't just the competition, it was the narrative. Jay was the relentless underdog, constantly evolving, slowly closing that gap, and never backing down. Ronnie was the unbeatable king, walking the fine line between superhuman and untouchable. Then finally, in 2006, the impossible happened. Jay dethroned Ronnie Coleman, ending his 8-year reign and completing one of the greatest redemption arcs in bodybuilding history. Their rivalry really had it all: longevity, competitive tension, dramatic highs and lows, and real character development. And even though they maintained mutual respect and even friendship off stage, when it came time to battle, it was pure intensity. So in my opinion, Ronnie vs. Jay easily lands in the S+ tier. It's the gold standard of bodybuilding rivalries, and probably always will be. Next up is a rivalry that marked the changing of the guards in the late 2000s, and that's Jay Cutler versus Phil Heath. While it wasn't as long or as emotionally charged as Jay's rivalry with Ronnie, this one was all about legacy versus potential, the reigning champ trying to hold his spot, and the rising star looking to take over. Phil had been climbing the ranks for a few years, showing off insane detail, fullness, and that signature 3D muscle belly look that set him apart from almost everyone in history. Jay, meanwhile, was coming off a huge comeback win in 2009, where he regained the title after losing it in 2008, something that no other Mr. Olympia had ever done before. That made their clash in 2010 even more interesting, as Jay was the established veteran, still massive and dominating in certain poses, but Phil was gaining fast and many fans were already calling him the heir apparent. Their matchup in 2010 was close, with Phil arguably winning several poses, especially from the front, but Jay's size, muscle maturity, and sheer presence kept him ahead just enough to hold on to that title. Then in 2011, the tides finally turned as Phil came in better than ever, and Jay, who was battling a torn bicep and obviously age, just could not keep up. Phil took the title and started a dynasty of his own, going on to win 7 straight Mr. Olympia titles. What made this rivalry interesting, though, is that it represented the end of one era and the start of another, and it was built on mutual respect, friendship, and real competitiveness. There wasn't drama or controversy, but there was high-level bodybuilding at its finest. So in my opinion, Jay vs. Phil would land in A tier, not the most intense rivalry ever, but a meaningful relationship and competitive transition between two Olympia legends. Now, let's get on to one of the most heated, dramatic, and downright unforgettable rivalries in bodybuilding history, and that would be Phil Heath versus Greene. This was not just a battle of physiques or a battle for a title, but a full-on clash of personalities, styles, and philosophies. Phil was the genetically gifted prodigy, 3D muscle, razor-sharp condition, and undeniable stage presence. On the other hand, was the gritty underdog with unmatched passion, wild opposing, and a fan base that absolutely rallied behind him. Their rivalry peaked from 2012 to 2014, when they went head-to-head 3 Olympias in a row, and while Phil won each time, none of those decisions ever came without a serious debate. Well, I guess 2013 was not really a debatable one, but in 2012 and 2014 especially, the comparisons were close, and many fans believed Kai's fullness and emotional presentation were enough to finally edge out the champ. But this rivalry went beyond just placings, it was personal. Their tension was visible on stage, sometimes to the point of near physical altercation, and it created an electricity during the Olympia weekend that the sport had not seen in years. Every press conference, every pose down, every comparison felt like a war, not just between two bodybuilders, but two completely different ideologies. And while Kai never officially took the title, he arguably won the crowd. Their battles brought in new fans, sparked endless online debates, and gave the 2010s era a real storyline to follow. The rivalry fizzled out after 2014, with Kai stepping away from the Olympia stage despite being offered multiple special invites, but the market left is undeniable on the history of bodybuilding, that is. So in my opinion, Phil versus Kai would land firmly in the S+ tier. It really had everything: competitiveness, real tension, passion, and legacy. Easily one of the most entertaining and impactful rivalries the sport has ever seen, and personally one of my favorite. Shifting gears outside of the open class, we've got a modern rivalry that, while short-lived, became one of the most hyped and closely followed in recent memory, and that would be Chris Bumstead versus Ramon Dino. While the open division often stole the spotlight, this classic physique rivalry drew just as much fanfare, especially with how different these two athletes actually were. Chris Bumstead, the undisputed king of classic, dominated the division with his elite structure, flawless flow, and commanding stage presence, ultimately winning 6 classic Olympia titles before announcing his retirement. Ramon Dino burst onto the scene in 2021, placing 5th at the Olympia, but it wasn't long before he positioned himself as the next big threat. In 2022, their showdown was heavily anticipated, with many believing Ramon had closed that gap. While Chris retained the title that year, the comparisons were definitely electric, and the difference between them felt closer than ever. The rivalry hit its peak once again in 2023, where Ramon brought arguably his best look ever. But once again, Chris managed to hold him off, securing his 5th Olympia win. Now, in my opinion, what made this rivalry stand out, even beyond their physiques, was the massive fan involvement, particularly from Ramon's, Brazilian fan base, which turned every showdown into a global event. The tension wasn't between the athletes, who remained very respectful towards each other, but rather between their supporters. After every Olympia, split-screen comparisons flooded Instagram, fan edits went viral, and debates raged across social media. There was a real national pride on the line, and that emotional investment made each of their battles feel even bigger. While Chris clearly maintained his dominance during their peak years, Ramon kept closing in that gap, and there was a growing sense that eventually maybe the tide might turn. But by the time Chris stepped away from the stage after his 6th Olympia win in 2024, Ramon Dino had slipped down to 4th place and had suffered an earlier setback at the 2024 Arnold Classic, where he actually lost to Wesley Vissers. That downturn raised questions about whether Ramon's time as a true title contender had already peaked. And while the rivalry was hugely hyped up and emotionally charged, especially thanks to Ramon's passionate Brazilian fan base, the reality is that Chris was always in firm control. Ramon was never truly close to winning, and in most comparisons there was a clear gap between them. A lot of the perceived closeness also came more from fan excitement and the narrative created around them, more so than from what actually played out on stage. So while the rivalry was fun to watch and undeniably brought attention to the classic physique, it never truly reached a real competitive level in my opinion. So, that said, I would say that Bumstead versus Ramon would land in the B tier, exciting and very popular, but ultimately too one-sided to be ranked any higher. Closing things out, we have what might be the most competitive and compelling rivalry of the modern and current era, and that is Hadi Choopan versus Derek Lunsford versus Samson Dauda. Yes, a three-way comparison that, features elite champions, each of whom has held the Olympia title, and each bringing something totally unique to the stage. What sets this rivalry apart from every other one on this list is how unpredictable and balanced it is. In 2022, Hadi finally claimed the Sandow with razor-sharp condition and dense muscle maturity, beating both Derek and Samson. Fast forward to 2023, and Derek made one of the best one-year leaps we've ever seen, bringing added size, improved balance, and arguably the best back pose on stage to, take down Hadi and Samson and claim that Olympia title for himself. Then in 2024, most recently, Samson Dauda turned the tables again, shocking many by winning the Olympia and establishing himself as a true force, defeating both Hadi and Derek in the process. What makes this rivalry so special is not just the titles being passed around, it's the stylistic contrast and how closely matched they all are. Hadi is known for his rugged density and rock-hard condition. Derek brings freaky proportions and unbeatable width from the back, while Samson combines aesthetics and flow with overwhelming size and stage presence. No one has clearly separated themselves from the pack, and all three have legitimate claims to being the best in the world, depending on the day and how they peak. Add to that the intense fan base energy, the high stakes, and the shifting Olympia results, and it's easy to see why this rivalry is so captivating. As it stands right now, it's still a developing rivalry, and the story feels far from over. But the foundation is there for something truly legendary, and in my opinion, this one would land in A tier for now, but with more title changes, intense showdowns, and if they keep pushing each other at this level, it's absolutely on track to becoming an S tier or even an S plus tier rivalry in the very near future. Anyways guys, that about does it for this video. Let me know down below your thoughts and opinions, and I hope you enjoyed it. With that being said, I will see you all in the next one. Thanks for watching.